Thank you for telling
Eric?
me about that.
Call the meeting to order at 7:02. Has there been a declaration of public notice?
Yes.
Okay, order of business. Do we have any public appearances today? Great. So let's move into the consent agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
Roll call vote. Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Peter? Elizabeth, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries.
And Tish, the minutes were really good. I triple checked them, they were really good, just because I gave me a refresh.
All right, let's move on to recognitions.
Okay, Governor Tony Evers and Senator Melissa Agard stopped by the high school earlier this week. They were able to connect with our science classes, staff, and sustainability committee on the solar array that we recently completed. We were very honored that they were able to visit and learn more about this fruitful project, and we also have some photos that you can browse. Congratulations to Danielle Wright, our Cottage Grove School principal, on being named one of Wisconsin's top influential black leaders by Madison 365. We are very fortunate to have her on our team at MG. Great job to all our...
Dan, she was like, when they put that out in the newsletter, the 365, she was one of the first 5.
Mhm.
So when you open that newsletter, here's this really nice picture of Danielle and a really nice summary of the work she's done. And it was really well done, if anybody else had an opportunity to see that. That's one I sent you.
Yep, thank you. Great job to all our winter sport athletes on their seasons thus far. Boys swim team recently took 7th place at the Lynn Marr Invitational last weekend with 5 top 10 finishes and winning 9 events total. The girls basketball team is proving to be a consistently amazing team as they've won their 8th straight game last Saturday. The gymnastics team finished 6th overall at last weekend's Mount Horeb Invitational. The team also earned personal best scores in 8 events, and we continue to root for all our athletic teams as they put in the hard work this season. And we can't conclude our recognitions without acknowledging our school board. January is School Board Recognition Month, so on behalf of the district, I'd like to say how appreciative we are of your dedication and the work that you do here for the Monona Grove School District.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to correspondence and announcements.
So we'd like to announce, it's the election season, and so we have 2 school board seats that will be up for the spring election on April 4th. And we have 2 candidates who have filed the necessary paperwork for those 2 seats. One is incumbent Elizabeth Cook, and the other is Rochelle Miller of Monona.
Okay, thanks, Dan. All right, moving on. I'm just to remind my board colleagues to please silence your cell phones. For those of you who are getting pinged right now, can you silence your cell?
There are pings on the computer, and you'll have to tell me how to do that.
All right, I'll show you how to do it. Thank you. I'll show you how to do it.
Oh, I can just go
while
to
we
the
move into
sound.
administration
I'll turn the
reports.
sound
Yeah,
way
just
down.
turn your volume up. Thank you, my friend. Administration reports.
Okay, 2 things I'd like
Sorry, Susan, I thought it
to
was
update the board on this evening. The first is Village of Cottage Grove polling locations. So as the village is growing, they are looking at the need for a second polling place, and so they're beginning to look at potential sites. This would not be until 2024 at the earliest. And obviously, schools are potential sites for polling places, and so I recently met with Village Clerk Lisa Collada, and we determined that if there were to be a school site, Granite Ridge would be the most logical site. The rationale is that if we're able to use the gym for a polling place, we're able to secure that area from the students. We have the most parking at that school compared to some of the other ones, and so walking through with logistics with Principal Reed Foster, we think that it is very much doable. So the biggest concerns are, number one, the rush of parent drop-off time and how that traffic would be dealt with. And then secondly, of course, is the utilization of the gym. That would displace our Phi Ed classes potentially 4 days a year if there were primary elections. In talking again to Principal Foster about that, he was not at all concerned that with advance notice, our Phi Ed teachers absolutely could, conduct classes elsewhere in, that wonderful building or perhaps outdoors if the weather permitted. And so if we were to move forward with this, it would come to the board for approval. We would create an MOU with the village. And so I wanted to bring that up tonight and just get some initial feedback or any questions or concerns that you would like me to look into as we consider that. My understanding is I did a little bit of research. I understand that years ago, Maywood was used as a polling place. Certainly, things have changed now, right, with the concerns for school safety and security, but many communities still rely very heavily on schools as polling places. So, if I take a few minutes tonight, any initial reactions or feedback?
Any questions for Dan or feedback?
Don't have an issue with it.
Okay. So, as I said, if we move forward, we'll definitely come to the board with an MOU for you to approve.
Great.
So, all right, the second thing that I'd like to bring up a little bit is our Maywood School and potential use for next school year. So we have confirmed with Madison that as the lease expires on June 30th, they are not going to be renewing the lease for New Westermundo. As you may recall, they are building a new elementary school that will for students currently attending Alice, and so New Westermundo will move back to that building. And so we are looking at potential uses, for the next year. And so we, first of all, as far as district use, we have identified a potential use for our students, and that would be for our age 18 to 21-year-old transition students that currently have a space at the high school. Having additional space, for that program as kind of a home base, I think would be helpful. We think we can vastly improve upon the space that we have at the high school by utilizing a couple of classrooms, access to the multi-purpose room and kitchen and so on. So Krista Foster and her team are looking at that. We'll take a walk through the building soon and determine if that really would be the right fit. But we're very encouraged and think that would be a great opportunity, for those students. And then we've also been in conversations with the city of Monona about potential use for particularly some of their rec programs. Right now they offer after-school programming, and then as well they are looking at providing a 4K wrap program, childcare, similar to what we've started at Taylor Prairie. We'd be thrilled if the city would do that and that we wouldn't have to actually sponsor the program. And so initial conversations with Jake Anderson seem very promising, that the space appears that it might very well be a great fit. So we'll be doing another walkthrough again soon. And then the formal discussion would talk between the city and the school board about if this were to work, what would the lease agreement look like and so on. So our timeline right now is in this next month for Mark and I to kind of work out kind of the general outline of what this might look like and a potential lease agreement. And then we'll move forward with conversations with the board and the city with the idea of perhaps by March having an idea if this is going to work and what that lease might look like.
What is the cost to operate that building? Utilities, mowing?
That's one of the things that Mark's in the process of starting to compile that data, because we have a really good agreement right now with MMSD where they are taking care of those things. And so obviously that's we need to have those numbers in order to determine what we think is.
I'm particularly interested in the utility costs, which I think are pretty substantial there. It's an old building with leaky windows.
And part of our analysis would be what if the building sat vacant? Okay, what would it cost at a minimum just to operate that way? What if we utilized it, as I mentioned, for our transition program? What would that cost be? And then what would be the additional cost if the city came in and utilized that? And I think the idea, right, we want to be real clear what those numbers are so we can have a fair agreement with the city if that were to come to fruition.
I mean, would we anticipate that we would ever, what's the maximum need we would ever have for that building would be the question.
Yeah.
And what's the justification for keeping it on the books if I don't know if there is an option?
Yeah,
that's
a really good point. And kind of our initial thought on that is that this would be, whatever time period we might have, we thought maybe a 3-year lease might make sense to give us that time to really do that analysis and study to determine a long-term plan, for the building.
Mm-hmm.
Susan?
Well, I guess partly in response to that, we don't have space at Winnequa really to offer that same wraparound care that we're
Right.
offering in Cottage Grove. So I think it's important in terms of equity, and I know there's a demand for it in Monona, so I think we don't have a better space for it. So I think it gives us that good opportunity. And granted, we do have to look at all the numbers, obviously, but I just think that's a real plus. The other thing is, one of the reasons, aside from just the fact that we had such a great arrangement with Nuestro Mundo in the beginning until the state put the kibosh on it in terms of letting us have some of our kids go every year, is that it is better for the building to have it used also, than to have it be sitting there empty and vacant and just barely keeping things going. I mean, when you're operating the whole thing, it's better for the building. So I see it as a real plus, and I'm really hopeful this can work out. I mean, I think it sounds great.
I would agree. I mean, the fact that it can be utilized for something that's going to, support or use for our kids, right, in the
Right.
community, even though it may not be school programs, that's certainly why we have the agreements we have with the city and village, and we're, it's a shared, purpose. So I would agree with that.
Susan?
Yeah, I think, again, knowing that each and every one of us are here because we care deeply about our students, I think to offer opportunities that benefit the students in the district in that building, and to have people talking to us about doing that, I think is wonderful. I mean, that's kind of how the Nuestro Mundo door opened. And I remember all those discussions, Madison and this, and it's just worked out to be wonderful. So, again, thinking with those thoughts about how can we use this to improve the needs of our students, a mental health clinic, after-school daycare. There's a lot of opportunities that are open. Again, you'll see these programs at the WSB program, and the people that are doing these kinds of things that we haven't had the space to do it in. And again, we're going to need to see the costs and how to balance the costs. But I appreciate the research and the way that you're looking at the use.
Great.
Thank you.
Eric?
This might actually be a question for Krista instead of Dan, but just with the 18 to 21 transition program, that's not necessarily meaning the students are going to be pulled out of the regular program. They're still being integrated in vocational community sites, so they still have the 100% integration.
Correct. This is students age 18 to 21, sort of a home-based option. It's kind of serving the purpose of the the space that we're using at the high school would be kind of, again, that LRE for kids who are post-grads or grad age and having that place. But yes, it would be in lieu of community placements, volunteer job placements, the kind of typical things that group of students is doing. That's why we also thought sharing a space would be, very workable, given that, we're not going to have 20 students in classes all day in
Yeah.
that space. Yeah.
I don't think some people understand how the 18 to 21 transition program
Yeah.
works. I just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
we weren't taking
Correct.
students
We're
out
obviously
from their peers and putting them in a different place.
I appreciate that question, Eric. I had a similar one, and then a clarifying question, which I think, Krista, you answered, which is we're looking at potentially utilizing the building for both options, right? A place for 18 to 21 transition and 4K wrap, not one or the other.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah.
Anything else on this for Dan? Great, well, run the numbers and we'll look forward to
Okay.
having further conversation. All right, moving on to board reports. The first one is Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee, which is me. I apologize for missing the meeting last time, but I appreciate the opportunity to share notes again. I thought I had my notes up, but I don't. Susan, do you want to go first for your committee?
Sure.
Great, thanks. I'll give you a second to pull my notes.
And I was not at the committee meeting. I hadn't seen my brother since my mother died, and we went on that trip right after Christmas. So and they changed the meeting to January 3rd, and I was unavailable. But we posted the minutes of that meeting for you, and Dan was actually there.
Yep.
So if you have any questions. And basically what they did, the major things they did was Dan gave a superintendent's report, and the information is absolutely excellent. He was very positive and said, well, things, quote, things are going so much better than last year. So I thought that was wonderful, and I wanted to repeat that. All teaching positions are filled, and particularly when you look at the issues with all cities, one city school right now, it's wonderful that you're doing what you're doing. You announced the operating referendum. Then they did new business. They were considering a grant from the Black Student Union, which they're deferring until February. They re-elected their same officers, Jason McCutcheon as president, Jane Beebe as vice president, Mary O'Connor as secretary, and Mary Salvi for treasurer, and they were all approved unanimously. They have a list of committees, and I'm just going to read them quickly so you have an idea of all the work that they're doing in the areas that they're working. They have a Pay It Forward program that funds specific needs for students in the school district, all different kinds of things. They do their fundraising, they do communications, innovation grants for teachers, brand grants, scholarships, investments, snack pack program, and they meet the needs of students in ways that we can't, and that's why the foundation was formed. At this point, they have not received any applications for innovation grants for next year. They're still, because they were not able to implement grants the year before last, they're kind of extending them and moving them forward. They're working on the Pay It Forward, and they're looking at an annual stipend for each building. Communications, the Traditions newsletter went out in December. There's a weekend snack pack committee, and they're raising money for that so that they can give snack packs to students. And they did an updated scholarship committee report because they're working on the scholarships for the students that will be distributed in June. And their plan is to meet next February 14th. Oh, at 4 p.m. on Valentine's Day.
On Valentine's Day.
Oh, that'll be fun. Dan's already laughing. That means he has to be there at 4 o'clock. Sorry.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions for Susan? All right, we can move into TLE. Thanks for your flexibility, Susan. Took me a second to pull up my report because I accidentally sent Lorraine my notes and not my report. The Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee met on Tuesday, December 6th, and there were 2 items on the agenda. The first item was a continued conversation about the high school math curriculum. As the board will recall, the high school is currently piloting 2 different math curriculums this year. In addition to making changes in curricular materials, the high school has also been in discussion about the sequencing of math courses. All students are required to take 3 years of math. Our current course sequence is algebra and geometry for all students, and after all those courses are completed, students have a choice of either Algebra 2 or Advanced Algebra. Advanced Algebra includes all elements of Algebra 2 plus an additional element of function, statistics, and trigonometry, also known as SFT, over the course of a single year. And then the combination of Algebra 2 and FST is standard for college entry in most places. Students who choose to take Algebra 2 would need to take an FST course in order to meet that standard college requirement. Given this, the math department, in collaboration with Principal McGrath, who's here, and Director of Instruction Lisa Hype, is recommending that Advanced Algebra be the 3rd math course for all students. This new sequence will be phased in over the course of the next school year, and a detailed memo outlining these changes and rationale can be found in board docs under our meeting notes from the 6th. The second agenda item was a presentation by Director of Instruction Lisa Hype, Director of Student Services Krista Foster, and Student Services and Equity Coordinator Shelby Steele to review current student level data. The purpose of that agenda item was to understand the baseline academic, social, emotional, and school climate data. And like every district across the nation, we've experienced learning loss as a result of the pandemic. And so we're really trying to look at what our baseline is as it stands right now so that we can look forward based on our curriculum changes that we're undergoing this year. From a school climate perspective, nearly all of our students across the district report that they enjoy being at school. They believe that their teachers care about them and that our schools are safe places, which is huge. This is an important component because feeling safe and supported lays the foundation for academic growth. The committee will review the data again in the spring or early fall to revisit our data, including evaluating the impact of curricular changes on our academic data. And all are welcome to attend our next meeting, which will be Monday, January 3rd at 3 o'clock. Questions about
Did you say
TLE?
Monday, January 3rd?
January 23rd
Okay.
at 3 o'clock. Fourth Monday of the month, 3 o'clock. So, questions about TLE at all? Yes, Susan?
This was, again, at times I think we should consider taping. This was an excellent meeting. And material presented was really presented well. It was understandable and clear, and there were very few questions because it was good. But it's material that the board doesn't always get at the same time. And so I always, whenever you get done and it's a really good presentation, I say, well, don't you want to present that to the board? So at some point, we should at least make that, again, they were excellent presentations, available so the board could at least on their own maybe watch them or just include a 5-minute summary of. Elizabeth just did a great job of doing that.
I was gonna say,
She did. She absolutely did.
I'm open to feedback on my board report, Susan, if you'd like more detail.
But I think there's still that funny balance. Eric did the same thing. He had wonderful presentations on general academic progress that's so important for your committee, but there are things that we all need here too. So again, Dan, if you just, I know it's a tough balance. However it works for you is just fine, I think. Maybe taping it.
I appreciate that feedback, Susan, and I want to reiterate that the folks that presented did an excellent job. And Mitch, I know you weren't able to attend the meeting, but I think I shared with you the memo that you wrote was very clearly laid out. It was well rationed. It had some really great points around equity that I think are really useful as we consider lots of other curriculum changes moving forward. So I really appreciated that. And I would say, I know we've talked and we've done in the past like the building presentations, and we've talked a little bit about kind of your directors at the district office doing presentations. And I think it might be interesting to have like a school data snapshot either at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year that sort of sets the stage for kind of here's what happened last year, here's where we're planning on going, here's what we've learned, here where was progress being made. And I think, Susan, that I'm wondering if that would satisfy, I think, the need for the full board to have kind of an overview of what's happening, while TLE can continue to like get into the details of those pieces.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we got into like a really great conversation about math curriculum, but I mean, it gets real wonky real quick, which I think is great for that committee. I would be curious about its utility at the larger board level, like that level of detail. But I do think having like, curriculum and instruction come in and do their like big report and having that as part of that could be useful.
I think that's absolutely a great idea. And the other thing is it helps us as board members learn where to channel those questions. So for instance, as our kids were coming through the curriculum, they were done with geometry at the end of 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're going, oh, so what do I do now? Like, what do I take next? And which math do I take next? Because normally that's your freshman, sophomore in high school. And it was difficult to always have the answer to those questions. So to just know where to refer them so that Mitch doesn't get on 50,000 phone calls about what math is my kid going to take. The other thing that's fascinating about how this program works is if you have a student that takes algebra in 8th grade and struggles and gets it done, had a B- in the class and said, I don't understand this, you can take it again in 9th grade and feel you've done it. And then he tested out in geometry because he'd already taken that his 8th grade year and was able to move. Again, you're meeting the needs of so many different types of students right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's great to hear that piece in your committee.
Thank you. Any other questions about TLE? Great, otherwise we will plan on seeing everyone on the 23rd. Agenda will be forthcoming. All right, moving on to possible action items, the 2022-2023 Monona Grove High School calendar revision.
Okay, so of course, the board approves our calendar every year, and we always make sure that we have a little bit of a buffer for our required instructional hours. And so at the high school, we had approximately 2 days built in. We've already used 3 days. And so we have to make up 1. And so as opposed to having students come on a day, late in June or adding a few minutes of the day, Principal McGrath with his team has come up with the proposal to instead use e-learning days, which do satisfy DPI requirements. So the memo explains the process, the days that we would like to schedule. So not only would we like to approval for the first day that we have to make up, but 2 more contingency dates should we need them for this winter. So with that, I think the memo is pretty clear, but if you have any specific questions about how that will work, Principal McGrath is here tonight and can answer any questions.
Susan?
The only question I had was, are these days that the students, just clarifying, already had off days?
Those 3 days are not currently student school days.
Okay. Have we queried so what if parents already have something planned for a 3-day time period?
It's a good question. One of the reasons that we're looking at the professional development days and days that are already on the calendar as off are so that teachers can plan that curriculum in sequence with what we're currently doing. And we're going to give students and families a heads up that on this date, you'll be responsible for the work that's outlined here. If you look at the dates that we prioritized also, with Monday, the February 27th being the first E-Day, that's actually a 4-day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the idea is that Friday, the 24th, is a non-contract day for all staff. The 27th is the PD day, but lessons would be posted by 4 p.m. on Thursday, so students would have the entire 4-day weekend to log in and interact and complete that work. Similarly, with that Monday, April 10th, we post those lessons on Friday the 7th by 4 p.m. so that students have that 3-day weekend to complete those lessons. Friday the 24th, March 24th, not an ideal date. That's the Friday right before spring break. Students would certainly have enough time, but we know that students generally have some kind of plans during spring break.
Susan?
So, in terms of the planning of the lessons, now that we're aware that we have to use, like, say, this February 27th date, what you're saying is teachers can be thinking now or kind of as they get closer so that they'll actually have these ready to go. I guess my thought is, we shouldn't, we could have technically another snow day after March. Hopefully that won't happen, so basically, whenever there's a snow day, that kind of triggers in the teachers' minds that I have to be thinking about creating some kind of lesson. And since the teachers are tied up that day, when you mentioned interactive, it would be interactive with online material, right, or other students, but not with a teacher.
Correct. Teachers would post that lesson and the expectations on Canvas and the
Right.
materials.
So there could be some video as part of it or whatever as well, whatever they do. All right. Yeah, as long as it is a meaty kind of lesson, a real lesson. Because I like it better. I think the thing is when you add minutes to every class or you add days at the end of the year, I've always, as a former teacher, questioned how even worthwhile that is. I don't think it means much. This seems better to me in terms of what's possible. And we know that this passes muster with DPI.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's interesting, 4 of the conference schools are already using this format for professional development days, and then an additional 3 schools will move in that direction when it's triggered by a snow day necessity.
Okay, yeah. It's a creative way to do it, I think. Yeah.
Any other question? Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, my thought would be, can we do this instead of having snow days? Well, it's going to snow tomorrow, we're going to have an e-learning day.
Districts have tried that, and they've really had a say, mixed results at best. You know, the turnaround for a teacher to be ready to go synchronously that next day with students. And then you run into the daycare students, you know, older siblings watching younger siblings. You run into the connectivity issue with students that aren't planning to have to be online that day and don't have access to be online. So you do run into a lot of issues if you try that, you know, the snow day itself to be an E-day. And in our conversations, we just thought it'd be more planful to say, designate that day, plan our lessons, and have them be as engaging as possible.
Also, snow days are one of the few joys, right? And so there's something to be said for not taking the snow day.
I was just going to say that, it was one of the memories of childhood, is how cool it is to get a snow day, and I just think that's kind of hard to give up.
Yeah.
In addition to the lack of planning, I mean, they wouldn't be ready for it, so, yeah.
Other questions for Mitch, otherwise I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about how you're sort of monitoring this approximately 40 minutes of engagement and work? It seems like a really specific number, which I assume is because of the DPI.
Yeah, it was keeping in mind the DPI minutes that we have per day, but also thinking about the student load of if they have 7 or 8 classes.
Yeah.
You know, how much time they're expected to engage and do work that day.
Yeah.
So we wanted that to be a reasonable amount of time, and we kind of, the conversation we had with coordinators was, you know, 40 would be an average. Some students would certainly be able to accomplish that task quicker and sooner, and some might take a little bit longer depending on the task. But we thought 40 was pretty reasonable, given that we were going to do all classes.
How are you determining that, though? I'm just curious. Just like based on how you know that a lesson would go? Like how do you determine that like a body of asynchronous work is 40 minutes on average?
Yeah, I think you know, teachers' professional judgment is really what we're relying on there, and teams are needing to plan that lesson. This will be our first go at it.
Yeah.
We'll certainly learn and have some takeaways from that and feedback from students. But you know, if it's watching a video and answering questions, or just watching the video itself and being ready to discuss and interact with other students about that content, you know, when they come back to school, then we know how long the video was and what we expected outside of that.
Great, thanks. All right, if there's no other questions, I would entertain a motion, please. Susan?
I move approval of the revision of the Monona Grove High School 2022-2023 school calendar as presented. Is that, yeah,
Yep.
Should I say revised? It should be of the revised calendar as presented, yeah.
Can I get a second?
Second.
We'll give it to Eric. All right, roll call vote. Susan Manning? Susan?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is process for filling school board vacancy.
Okay, so most of, or a lot of this is covered by statutory requirements and board policy, so I've noted the relevant policies and statutes. But you do have some flexibility as a board to make, decide exactly how you're going to fill this vacancy. And so we have attached a draft notice that we're looking for approval. As part of the approval would be that notice. This is the identical type of notice we used the last time that we had a vacancy, where you were asking potential candidates to submit a letter of interest. And then there were 2 questions that the board determined at that time that would be helpful to ask the candidates to answer. You certainly could revise those, but it seems to me that the process worked very well, last time, and then depending on the number of applicants you have, you certainly need to call a special meeting to review those applicants. Last time you chose to actually offer interviews for the candidates, and so my thought would be that we probably should schedule at least 2 evenings just in case. Last time we did have a large number of candidates, and it took 2 evenings to get through, and then once you've had an opportunity to do that, the recommendation from legal counsel about how you actually select the candidate is to use the same process you do when you select your officers. And And then this seat is, because of the timing of it, of course, would not be up on this April election, so the candidate would fill this seat until next year. And in fact, this seat does come up for election, I believe, a year from now, so.
Eric?
Wondering, aren't we gonna interview everybody anyways? Does it really make a difference having the questions if we're gonna interview all the candidates that apply?
Yeah.
Susan Fax?
To me, it does. I think it, for one thing, makes, causes people to think about why they're interested in running, what do they bring. And I think it's helpful for us to have that basic introduction before they come in, because then that's another discussion we have to have, and I don't remember what we did if we just came up with questions during the interview, or, I know one time when we did this, we agreed on questions ahead of time. It's not like hiring someone for a job where you have to ask everyone the same question, so it's a little bit different in that way. But that might be a discussion we have to have later. I think these are pretty good introductory things that people should think about when they think about running, so.
But can't
I
those
like
be the
that.
questions that when we do the interviews? Can't
Well,
those be the
to
same
me,
questions?
I guess my thought on that is that when we see those questions, that may trigger other questions that we could ask. I just think it's helpful to have some introduction to the person before they come in, and then if we have extra questions, personally.
I find the written answers to questions more useful than the interviews.
You would.
Yeah, I would.
Susan Manning, you and your hand
I agree. It's kind of like, the analogy is like prepping for policy. When we know what policy you're going to look at and what the discussion is going to focus on, there may be lots of questions that come out of that, and that's your interview. But it gives everybody who applies an opportunity to provide similar information. And one of the things that happens in the interview is you hear somebody talking, all of a sudden you ask a question, but you ask that question to one person and you don't ask it of the other three. And then it changes the balance. To have that basic written form tends to level the process as you're coming forward. And I found that very helpful before.
I'm curious what my fellow Gen Xer thinks about it.
I'm a millennial, thank you.
Or millennial.
I don't know if that's the right thing to say or the wrong thing to say on the live
Maybe
stream.
we can just text her in.
I'm on TikTok level, but if I have Instagram story, then maybe I'm here for it.
Present a TikTok video.
So here's how I feel about it, which is on the one hand, I think it's useful for folks to have thought about these things, right, and be able to write them down. My question is, and so I'm going to answer your question with a question because I was on the receiving end of this last year, not the board or last
So
time.
millennial, dude.
Well, I know. Well, what did you really use that information for? Because from what I recall, you asked me those two questions anyway.
Mhm.
And so if you're going to ask me anyway, then other than an exercise in my own thinking around how I would want to answer that question, which is not useful, right? Like preparing, like you would do for any kind of interview. Other than that, like, what is the goal? And so if there's not an additional stated goal, then I think it's an additional burden that's probably not worth adding onto it. But if there is another goal other than just the thought exercise of having people think about it, then I'm open to having them on there. That's how I feel. Susan?
The pre-written thing adds consistency to the process. So when you come, we may have asked you those questions, but one of the thoughts you have to have as a candidate is, didn't I already answer these? Didn't they read them? And you can identify right away who didn't. It gives you a whole field. So it's not only that it provides a consistent process, but it also gives you, as a candidate, a view of the approach to the board responsibilities.
Yeah, although my counter to that would be, in this circumstance, which is a little bit different from a job interview, right? Like, you're selecting this person, not the other way around in that same way. So it's like, I guess I could look and say, well, no one read it. I don't want to be part of a group where no one reads anything, I suppose. But I just feel like, I don't know that doesn't feel super compelling to me personally, but I appreciate the point.
I'm fine having them, I just don't think it's necessary.
My answer to you is that speaking extemporaneously is a skill, is a talent. Not everybody has it equally. And to be honest, I don't think it's particularly important for this job.
Yeah.
And having written questions gives me a little bit better opportunity to evaluate a person's thought processes, which is to me what's important.
That's fair.
I appreciate that as well. I think that's a good point. I mean, I think, yeah, I just think it gives you something to expand on when they come in, and whereas if the first time you hear it is when they come in, it's just different. And I think that is a valid point, that not everybody is as good on their feet.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
That's fair. The other question that I would have, and I think that this is true whether you have someone in front of you talking, right? Because we have preconceived notions about sort of what it is to be articulate and what it is to be able to write in a way that's articulate, and the extent to which, when we're reviewing written work in front of us, right, that we think about the bias elements of that, right? And so I just didn't know if that came up in the last time you did this either. Like, I don't know, maybe you get someone who doesn't like have the best grammar, let's say, or writing in full, like, and what is that? How does that load when then that person is in front of you?
When we all run for the board, we have to do all those written questions. And they're harder because you have to stick to word
You don't have to
limits.
do them.
Well, you can not
You don't
do
have to do
them,
them.
but I think it's I think you should do them.
But you don't
I'll
know everybody
I'll
else.
rephrase it that way. There is a strong expectation among the public that you do them. And when you don't, it carries a certain message, I think. And I think, and there are different groups, and to me, it was part of the value of the different groups that ask you those questions, is it makes you think about a lot of different things, because you have to kind of think about it. I mean, at that point, you could think, do I really want to get into this? Because, but I just think I think it's useful, and I think it's also, whoever this is, if they decide they want to continue to serve, they will have to do it the next time,
Yeah.
most likely, unless they elect not to, in which case that is an option, and I know that was used by some people this last time around, but I think it carries with it its own message.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, we're getting far afield here, but
Yeah.
Hold on, Susan Manning.
Well, it also offers what qualities and experience do you have that will enhance? So you walk in and you've already kind of seen that, and you have a feel for that. You can ask the next question. And you have the time to add. We limited, it seemed to me, didn't we, Dan, have time frames on that too? So you've already allowed them to cover the first possibly 5 minutes that would have taken out their time frame. Now you can ask them, why did you pick this as your major, as your experience in school, rather than saying, and what's your background? I mean,
Yeah.
you already have that. You can go into the more, you can go beyond into step 2.
Peter? Peter.
bias is much more of a problem in a face-to-face meeting than it is in a written communication.
Yeah, like the
If you're worried about bias, we should just do this entirely written.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
Pull up our HR person to, I don't know. I mean, that may be true, I have no idea. Susan?
The other thing that I just remembered is that we decided at one point we did not want resumes, because we did have one year, and I don't remember if this happened last time, where somebody submitted a resume that it was unsolicited, but it was included in the documents, and it was very impressive, and that also creates an unfair advantage. I mean, I think we should not take resumes, and if someone sends them, they should just stay at the district office. Because that's, unless we want them from everybody, unless we want to ask for that, which I don't necessarily want to do, so. I just thought of that as I was reading this. I just remember that came up, and because we all saw it, we had a lengthy discussion. This was a couple times ago, we had to do an appointment, and we felt like it gave that person an unfair advantage. I don't know that we ended up choosing that person, actually, but I guess it was just something that occurred to us that we should have said we don't want them.
Well, I want to say things, but I'm not going to, so. we
Wait,
can
what?
move on. I want to say things, but I think we should move on, so.
Well, let's
Well,
spend some time on it, because I think it's important. I want
No,
us
I
to
just
spend-
like, okay, so like, I mean, just certain things come up, like Susan Manning, you mentioned, like, what did you go to school for? Well, what if we get people that apply that didn't go to college? That's totally fine. So right away, there's like a bias thing automatically, like you're assuming that people can't be on the board unless they went to college. It's totally not true. They can be on the board if they didn't go to high school and finish high school, and that's totally fine, because we want representatives from the community, so we shouldn't get in, I just don't want to get into those types of things. And I thought sometimes having questions like this might rule out good candidates that we have, because this may be intimidating for them to write these questions out. So that was where I was coming from with it. So I thought we would have maybe a chance of a wider application pool if we didn't have the questions.
Susan Manning.
Again, I appreciate those thoughts, but I think truthfully, I don't consider myself a very good writer, and I'm not sure that I express myself well in writing or even verbally sometimes. But this opportunity gives you both avenues to express yourself rather than just one. So let's say you're a great speaker, and somebody is really talented but not as good as communicating during the interview. We already had, this gives us an opportunity to try more than one pathway and limit them in only expressing themselves verbally. So it's just, and if someone says, I would prefer not to do that, we're not going to require it. We're still going to interview them. But it's what we're asking them to answer the following questions.
So if we are going to keep the questions, and it sounds like majority of folks here want to, I would recommend making a change to B. B to me reads very long. It's like qualities and experiences, enhancing board decision making and contribution. Like, I think we can just ask, like, you know, what qualities will you bring to the board, right? Or, you know, just something real simple. And then you have two simple questions. Why do you want to do it?
What qualities and experience do you have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think simplifying B maybe would help. It reads quite long to me.
Well, I would agree, because basically what qualities and experience is redundant when you say what's your contribution to the board. Because, again, that's kind of a pathway that,
Well, and maybe that's the better
That's
question.
not-
What do you
that's a
hope
modifying
to,
thing, though, that's
Yeah,
not a separate
yeah.
thing.
but like, what do you hope to contribute to the board? Like,
but you're also, Susan's also right, is that instead of just telling me what your qualities and experience are, it says, what do you have that relates to what your role will be as a board? That also tells you what your thought about what your role is going to be while you're on the board. That gives you a whole nother little piece of the conversation. So,
I personally would prefer not to ask that question. I think that question's not relevant to a good candidate. Because I think you can learn about what it is to be a good board member, right? Like, if you've never experienced being on a board before, like, I think that you can come and we can show folks, right? Like, how to do it and how to have the mechanics around it. I think a more useful question, if the purpose of this is to understand our candidates differently or deeper, is to ask, like, what they think they can bring to the board, regardless of what their experiences are related to board level work.
So like what relevant qualities and experience do you have, or?
No,
That's
just,
kind
why are you interested in serving on the board? One question. Is that what you're saying?
but
I'm okay with it too. Well, that's Peter.
You know, we in this
Forgot
role,
I'm
for this
insurance today.
appointment, for this role, we stand in we represent the voters, we stand in for the voters. Because there's a vacancy, they don't have an opportunity to elect somebody. And I think question B, with qualities and experience, that's exactly what voters ask people. That's what they want to know about people. And I think that makes it a very relevant question. And, you know, as far as, yeah, sure, there's people who might have experience or whatever who can come into the board and over time make a difference. At the same time, what our goal is it's not able to, you know, to nursemaid people at this.
Sure.
If you have a choice between two candidates, otherwise equal, and one has experience and one doesn't, the one with experience is probably the one to choose.
For the board?
For the,
What experience for the
Here,
board,
let-
Peter?
let-
oh, yeah,
What
that's,
experience for the board?
that's very easy.
Eric, let
That's
Peter
actually,
finish.
that's actually really good. And the answer is to have experience that in a decision-making, in a group decision-making processes, at any level, any kind, knowing how to work with people to make decisions and knowing how to look at and evaluate data to help with that process. It's easy.
Okay,
Eric?
no, that's fine.
Susan Manning?
Again, an example, I think, is, what was the name of the gentleman that worked out at MATC?
I don't think we should need to mention
I'm
that.
just using, when he came forward on your committee,
Right?
again, the expertise and
It's-
the mix,
Yeah.
the mix that he had on that committee was, again, it made a great committee meeting to watch, because the knowledge and the mixing and the integration, and this question, not just why, because I really want to run for the board, and I really think kids are great, and I want to do stuff for kids. So when you listen to Peter's committee meetings, you could see this Part B come in. And I think we're seeing the same thing we just saw when we started this. We're seeing basically, we can talk about this for another hour and a half if we want to, because it's important.
It is kind of interesting.
It is interesting.
It is interesting to think
But the
about.
fact is, I keep seeing this consensus of 3, and you may want to move on. It's up to you, but I would say you may want to modify that, simplify B, but you're saying, what are you bringing that is going to benefit our students? And on your committee, man, the minute they started to meet, and the way that you're working with the staff on your committee, you can see these things. And that's what we're trying to see, is this insight into what do you bring. We have 10 people applying. What do you bring that makes this integration piece work?
Susan Fox?
Yeah, I don't find B all that complicated, but I think if you want to shorten it, you could just say something like, what qualities and experience do you have to bring to the board, or to bring to your work on the board, something like that.
Yeah,
And that's fine.
yeah.
But I do think it's a little different than just saying, why are you interested? I think it expands. I think it helps the person. The person might think about it and think, you know what, maybe I don't want to do this. I mean, I don't know. I just think it does not hurt to ask people to sit down and think about whether they really want to make this commitment and why they want to do it. And I don't think this is asking too much, frankly. So, and I just think it's a good jumping off point to sort of see that from everyone when they come in, and then pursue it, and because of things they say, that other questions will arise, hopefully, I would think.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with 2 questions. I do feel like that second question just needs to be simplified, and I think the way that you worded it works for me, so.
It's fine with me. Is this a,
Yeah, I'm fine with
is this
that.
an
But
action? Or what is it? So do we have to approve the announcement, or are we? I mean, is
Yeah,
that-
I think at a minimum for this evening is just approving the vacancy notice so we get that posted. And then when it comes time for you actually to do the interviews, we'll have make sure there's an opportunity for you guys to come to agreement on how you're going to do that process.
Right, but this, okay, yeah, so
So
this
we
is
would wanna
this is all
amend
part of the
this
notice, so we should
draft
amend it
notice.
right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then well, technically, we have to have a motion on the floor for me to amend it.
Okay, so move approval of process for filling school board vacancy as presented.
Second,
Okay.
and then I move to amend item
Do
B.
I have to vote first or no?
no.
No.
First you do the
Okay.
amendment.
First, you amend.
Thank you, Peter.
I move to amend question B to read, what qualities and experience do you have to bring to the work of the board?
Do you need a second on that?
Second, I thought.
What qualities and experience do you have? Can you read it again, Susan Fox? Sorry.
I didn't write it down. So what qualities and experience do you have to bring to the work of the board? Or the board's work, maybe that's better. Less words. Work of the board. I mean, it's shorter. kind of says the same thing.
And somebody second the motion?
Well,
Yes.
did you say
Yeah.
what qualities and experience do you have that will contribute to the board?
I like that.
Yep, that's fine. That's it.
Sure.
Can I squeeze you that as a friendly amendment?
Yep.
What's that?
Yeah.
So the question would be,
We
what,
don't have to make the
well, you have to
motion
make
yet.
3 motions.
Oh, gotcha.
So what qualities and experience do you have to contribute to the board? That's,
Like it.
that's, yeah, it's cleaner.
You
So
got
I was
that,
trying
Tish?
to avoid the word contribute, because I thought people thought that was, yeah.
Second.
Okay.
We,
Well, I just want to make sure Tish got it. before
yeah,
we
that's
vote.
what we're working on.
Sorry.
No, it's not you.
Okay.
We're moving fast here today.
What qualities and
All of a sudden.
experience do you have to contribute to the board?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. Is that good with you, Susan?
All right, roll call vote. Susan Manning?
Second, yeah, fine.
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
I,
Eric?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Now we have to
Do the
vote on
main motion.
Oh,
That was
we
the
gotta vote on the
amendment.
main motion too? All right, roll call vote again.
Yep, so now we're voting on the main motion.
Right.
I don't have to make another one.
No, yeah, no.
No, we just vote, right?
Yeah, right.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Again. All right. Item number 3, resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for recurring purposes.
Okay, if any of you looked at the resolution that was posted earlier today or made a copy of it, there was a typo, and so the one that is posted now is correct. It's the same numbers that were presented at last week's workshop, to make sure we're looking at the same resolution. And so it is for the year one, $6 million for the 23-24 school year, an additional $1.6 million for a total of $7.6 million for 24-25, and an additional $6.2 for a total of $13.8 for 25-26. And remember, the rationale for that third number being larger is that's rolling in the 3.7 that we currently have, that it, expires. So, so we're looking tonight, we have 2 action items. One to approve this resolution, authorizing to exceed the revenue limit, and the next agenda item is a much larger resolution with regard to the ballot.
All right. Yeah.
Can I have a motion, please?
Yeah, it's important to note that this replaces the existing referendum, what we have,
Yeah.
and then it wraps around that and adds to it. And that's why the numbers are a little bit wonky, is that there's an existing referendum that falls off in 2 years, and this wraps around that. It's also important to note that we have not done this kind of recurring referendum in the past. The only recurring referenda we have done in the past have been small ones associated with new buildings.
So move approval of the resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for recurring purposes as presented.
I will second that.
Any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Moving on to action item number 4, resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for recurring purposes to exceed revenue limit for recurring purposes. Is that supposed to be in there twice? Do you know?
Looked like a
No.
typo to me. Yeah, I think it's just.
So if you look at the attachment, title of it, that would be the correct language.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for catching that.
In the subject here.
Yeah, I almost saw that, but I, yeah, I
Top of
saw
the-
that.
If you
It's
look
already
at the
posted in the agenda.
attachment down below.
Yes.
Just like you read before.
I just like.
Sure.
Got it.
Okay. Can I get a motion, please?
I move approval of the resolution providing for referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for recurring purposes to exceed, as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. All right, moving on to discussion items. 2023-2024 open enrollment recommendations.
Okay, so tonight is no action, just wanted to have a preliminary discussion about the process we're doing, using that we'll bring forward at the next meeting with regard to our recommendations for open enrollment. As you recall, it's a statutory requirement that all school boards vote in January to determine the number of spaces for next school year. And so the document that, there's two attachments. The first one is our projections as of this past week. They may change slightly when we come back to the next meeting. And then the second page of that first document shows grade by grade at each building the number of current students we have that are residents versus open enrollment in total, per grade level. And so one thing to note when you look at those numbers, we have been tracking really closely since the beginning of the school year. You might recall we did an enrollment study about 4 years ago that projected growth of between 50 and 100 resident students per year over the next 20 years, due primarily to the new construction in the Cottage Grove area. Though over the last 3 years, we really hadn't seen that growth yet. Certainly COVID had an impact on that. Since the start of the year, we are seeing the growth. And so since September, we are currently up 32 resident students with another 11 who are in the process of registering. So basically for the first semester, we're going to be at 43 resident students, which is in line with what those projections were a couple of years ago. And so when we look at the projection for next year, we always will take our current grade level, move it forward, and then in the past, we've always added a few seats per grade level for potential move-ins. We've never gone more than 5 per grade level in the past. At this point, we're tentatively looking at recommending 8 per grade level, just to make sure that we have enough space and we don't have too large of class sizes. And so for this chart, what we did is put an additional 6 per grade level in the Cottage Grove schools, 2 per grade level at Winnequa School, for a total of 8 on the combined schools. Now, first semester, we haven't seen that growth at Winnequa. Over the last few years, we've seen a little bit of student growth in the city of Monona, but that does appear to be leveling off. But we still want to make sure we save some spaces. It's not like it's not moving at all. And it doesn't. When we do the approval, we actually do it by grade level for the entire district, so we don't have to differentiate between the Monona and Cottage Grove schools. So I did put for the second attachment kind of a preliminary recommendation based on where the numbers are now of what we would be looking at. Those in the enrollment projections, those enrollments that are highlighted in yellow, those will absolutely change. Those are our 4K and 5K. Our staff are in the process of it's continually changing each week as we're trying to get commitments from parents that will be enrolling their children in those grades. And so those numbers will update, next week. And those are the 2 areas where we have, generally the most amount of space. But as you know, it's one thing to have space at the elementary, but eventually those kids get to high school, and the high school is getting full. So you see on our preliminary recommendation, we'll be recommending 0 seats at the high school next year, probably the year after as well. And, we have physical space, but it will mean adding additional staff if that continues to grow. So something we want to watch very carefully. And if we start limiting the open enrollment, we think we're in a good place for some years to come yet. We do have our smallest class is next year's 7th grade. So that is actually will provide a little relief at the high school in 2 years, which is probably a good thing right now. So when we look at determining space, we have our board policy on class sizes. That's what drives it. We also know that you are not required to, if we have physical space in the building, we're not required to add staff to accommodate students, which would be the case like at Granite Ridge. Even though we have some empty classrooms, we're not going to add a teacher and say take 20 kids to fill that classroom, because we know that will create issues in the future. So let me pause there. I mean, it's essentially the same, as we've always done as far as the process. The big difference is the growth that we're seeing and leaving more, saving seats, I guess, for the resident growth during this next year.
Questions for Dan?
And this is, usually we revise this later in the year. Is it your intention that as things firm up, you would revise that number?
Yeah, so through the procedures prescribed by DPI, we're not supposed to do any revisions until after this enrollment period closes. We notify the parents if there's a seat for them or not. After that, and we've gone through that process, then we can go back and update our projections and revise the numbers. We've done it a little bit early, a couple years, probably not exactly
Not taking
procedurally
confessions.
correct. But to answer your question, yes, I would expect that we'll look, if we have updated projections, beginning of the summer, of course, we come back and revise those numbers.
Other questions, Susan?
But can we only revise them upward by taking more?
Correct.
So
Yep,
that's
good
why it's
point.
important to be relatively conservative
Yes.
here, so.
Yeah.
So the 48 for 4K, you feel like that's okay?
Yeah.
Seems like a lot. Okay.
The other thing I did add to the document for that preliminary recommendation on that far right column, just so you have a point of reference, the number of actual applications by grade level that we received this past year. And so even though there were 48 applications for 4K this past year, of course, not everyone accepts, the seat. And so, clearly, those are always the two biggest grades, the 4K and 5K.
Why is it, Dan?
I think, certainly it makes sense, right, as students are entering into school for the first time, if they're living in a neighboring district and want to enroll their, child to start the year, as opposed to having their child transfer from one district to the other after they've already started. The other big number, of course, you see is at ninth grade, kind of the same idea
Same
that,
idea, yeah.
yeah.
Other questions for Dan? Dan, last year we didn't open enrollment at the high school either, right? We had no seats?
Right.
Okay, so this will be our second year in a row then?
Yeah.
All right, no, if there's no other questions, can move on to discussion item number 2, WASB Delegate Assembly Resolutions.
Very well.
Who's her?
I don't know
It's you,
if it-
right, Susan?
Right, yeah, and
Delegate.
I don't know whether did people have a chance to look at these, or
Yeah, I don't have
There-
it.
there are a few related to students with disabilities, which to me, they all pretty much make sense. I just didn't know from Eric and Elizabeth in particular, because they tend to zero in on those, if they'd be ones you might want to pay more attention to. I mean, the high-cost transportation aid seems like a no-brainer to me, the voter education. Most of them are pretty clear-cut. There are a few that deal with, this came partly from staff as well, reducing temporarily or giving some flexibility with licensure, temporary licensure, because as we know, the shortage is huge and it's really a problem in particularly rural areas. I was interested to see that one of the suggestions along that line was to, the legislature did provide flexibility with this Foundations of Reading Test requirement for teachers of special ed only, and they're coming back this year. I mean, it was a part of the policy committee, so this isn't just from staff, was to expand that to other teachers, elementary teachers, special ed reading teacher, reading specialists, so not just special ed teachers, because again, they are having trouble finding it. Apparently that's an expensive test, and I don't know a lot about it. You guys might know more about it.
It's
So they're-
expensive and it's notoriously difficult for particular subgroups of folks.
Yeah, that's I think what the thinking was, and I hadn't done a lot of research on that, but when I read it. So otherwise, there weren't really any that I felt like we would be concerned about. There was one that was interesting. Let me see if I can find what it says. About, how when the government, and this probably is a good thing, but it gave me a little pause. When you get federal funding for nutrition, for example, for schools, a given administration can decide that you therefore cannot, if you're going to take federal funding for school nutrition, you can't discriminate against students on the basis of gender identity or anything like that. They want to, one of the resolutions is to remove that, the ability to do that, and say that that needs to be part of a rulemaking process that the federal government would go through. The rulemaking process generally takes 2 or 3 years. So that's the only one I wasn't quite sure what I thought about. I thought, when things are hot button issues as they are right now, and to me, that's a civil rights issue, and to say that you're not going to give the government any leverage to enforce that, I have a little bit of a problem with.
Which
It's
one?
Resolution 2314, so it's on page 8, the top one.
That one caught my attention as
Yeah.
well, especially when you look at the rationale that's listed.
Right, yeah, the rationale said, we called on all school districts that participate in any federal child nutrition programs to enforce prohibitions on sex discrimination, to include discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. And because we're seeing states pass laws, and I just think there has to be a way to ensure the civil rights of kids are not being violated. And if it takes that, it may take that. So I'm not personally comfortable with leaving it to rulemaking when I looked up that process and saw that it can take 2 or 3 years.
I
Well,
looked
that's
to
what
see
the
who,
legislature-
it was submitted by the New London School Board.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't even look at that. I have more stuff to read here, but. So that's the only one I was thinking I might be inclined to, oppose that resolution, but personally. But I'd be interested in what you think about it. Eric?
And I do have a question, and it's just maybe a clarifying question, for 2308, the services for students with disabilities at voucher schools. And so just to clarify, Dan, previously or in the current right now, if there is a student in the Monona Grove School District that goes to a charter or voucher school from the parents, and they have an IEP and have special ed services, for instance, like speech and language, that school does not have to provide that. We are obligated to provide that service for that school. Is that correct?
So specifically voucher schools, I'm not sure because we don't have any in our district.
Okay,
But just in general, students who attend private schools,
that's what I mean.
We
I
do
may be using the wrong
provide
term,
services.
private schools. So a private school, a voucher is, they can use the different.
yeah. The
private schools
voucher
are
is a
talking
little bit
about.
different about how the money flows, is the only
But
difference.
the
Yeah.
level of services this is a better question for Krista, so I'm just
Yeah.
gonna say a thing and then Krista chime in and correct me, but the level of service traditionally provided to parentally enrolled, like students who are parentally placed in private school are very minimal, and we've got some autonomy in terms of what we allocate resources for.
But we still need to provide it though.
Yes,
Right,
and.
correct?
I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, and Mark weighed into equitable services governs that for parentally placed private school students who are in a private school in our district. We have a certain amount that and you're correct, we have some autonomy about how we determine that amount is, geared toward that school. It's a collaboration between the
Mhm.
private schools and with us, but it is a
And the type of services, correct?
designated amount. That we
Krista?
have some, again, it's a two-way conversation, but yes, some
But
autonomy.
it's the amount and the type of service?
It's more the amount. I
Correct, we
think,
take
yeah.
the financial amount, the funding amount,
Right.
and we determine collaboratively what the services are
Mhm.
going to look like, and when it,
It's,
it's limited.
it's
Yeah.
both through federal, or I'm sorry, the
Yeah.
flow-through,
Mhm.
handicap aid, and title programs as well.
Got it.
So, and then to answer your question, Eric, the voucher, basically it's an in and out on our revenue limit. So if we have to pay, or if a district has to pay $500,000 for voucher kids, we get to put that on the revenue limit the next year. But we still have to pay it out. It's kind of a
Exactly.
cash flow
Yeah,
thing.
that's a
So
weird-
then my question is this rationale resolution 3.93 fix some of that with using the special needs scholarship program, that money would be in place of the, Mark, what you said, would flow through money that we have to use it from?
Flow-through is different
Okay.
than the voucher.
I'm confused.
Yeah,
because I don't understand this
one, this
resolution.
just relates to voucher schools, which we don't have any in
Okay.
Monona, so.
So just
Um,
voucher schools.
And it's because the resolution was passed before the legislature created the special needs scholarship program, which now provides for that. So they're saying it's kind of duplication, we don't need it anymore, because there is this new law that says that there did not used to be a state program to give funding, but now it comes through the voucher program, so.
So
it's
there's two
kind of-
vouchers, basically. There's a regular ed kid or a special ed student.
Right, so the repeal is that WASB supports legislation requiring private schools participating in any parental choice program to accept and provide services to students with disabilities with additional state funding for the education of these students. That's the repeal, right? So I'm just trying, what's changing then? Maybe that's my question.
They're
What
saying-
does this change?
They're just saying it's not necessary to have it in there anymore because.
Because of the-
Because of the special needs scholarship
Yeah.
program, which
Oh.
replaces.
It's covered by that.
So it's covered by that, so
Okay.
there's no
Because
need.
right now they
for
get-
So
it.
it's more of
It's
just
It's
a
more of a
wording and
cleanup,
clarification.
yeah, it's more of a
Okay.
cleanup than,
Oh,
yeah.
I
Because it's
thought it
already
was-
in the
No,
law.
I don't
No,
understand it. so-
It is confusing. I read it twice.
Yeah.
I looked up the statute too, because I thought, yeah,
Okay, no, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
so, yeah.
It's confusing a little
it
bit.
is.
Especially if you don't, I mean, I'm in the field and it's confusing.
Yeah, no, it's still, yeah, I know.
Okay, thanks.
Well, all the funding.
That's because lawyers write it.
Yeah.
But another
Keep us
one
posted
that
on
was
that.
interesting is 23.04, or on page 2. Currently, now again, these resolutions are simply to guide our legislative liaisons, WSB's legislative, when they talk with legislators. A lot of these aren't going to get into law because, and it depends, but it's what they are authorized to work on and directed, not only authorized, but directed to discuss these things with legislators. So currently, a resolution supports legislation which gives school districts' IEP team appeal recourse in cases where the parent refuses to accept a program for a handicapped child when recommended by the IEP team under Chapter 115. The rationale for repealing that is that the language is outdated. Its focus arguably no longer reflects the direction in which special ed law has evolved since this was adopted. And it's out of step with heightened calls for parental involvement in and consent for the educational program of their children, which is currently prevalent. So in other words, if there's an IEP and there seems to be a clear need for special ed services, the parent doesn't want it, the school has no appeal. It just means then the school can't do it. Which, that is kind of in keeping with the way things go. It's, may create other problems, but I don't know how
the
the
fact that
appeal
this
ever
was
works.
written in 1978.
Yeah,
a
it was
lot
in
has changed
1970, a lot has
since then.
changed since
Yeah.
then, so that's another one. It's not being replaced, it's just being repealed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a clear statement about discipline too, that, 2308.
I understand.
No, it wasn't 2308. 2309. There's one here that just, it was talked about
2305?
2305, yeah, I didn't write it on my separate list. Yeah, that, basically just emphasizing that discipline can't be discriminatory. And so they want to replace it with this statement that ensures the right to a free and appropriate public education for a student with a disability is not infringed by discriminatory disciplinary policies, because currently that has been an issue. So it's still guaranteeing safety of students, but phrasing it in a more positive way, which I think makes sense.
Yeah.
So. Otherwise, so any other thoughts on the one I flagged about the?
I'll be
on page
interested to see
8?
how the gun one goes,
How
how the gun
the gun one? Yeah.
resolution goes.
Yeah. Well, they did, I mean, they do have in there the caveat for, because there are schools up north that do, I mean, there are schools that teach trap shooting and that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So there is an allowance for that still, which, yeah, I mean, that'll be an interesting discussion. I think this 2314 might also be interesting, so unless anybody thinks I should support it, I don't plan to not support it.
No, I agree with you. I think it's
I kind of get the rationale. You'd
Strange.
like to think there should be a rule, but if rulemaking takes that long, it's.
well, and it feels counterintuitive because
Yeah, it's
resolution
not-
2315 is all about universal free meals and how
Right.
proper nutrition plays an important role. And so if you feel that way, then you'd think that would apply to then not discriminating against
Right,
students who
right.
are accessing USDA meal
Right,
programs.
yeah.
No, it's strange. Any other questions for Susan? Awesome, thanks for representing us, Susan. All right, last but not least, future meeting dates. We have a couple of special meeting dates we need to schedule here.
Okay, so of course, the most important is the, filling the board vacancy. So my recommendation is we schedule 2 nights in case they are both needed. And if they're not both, you can always go with one. So potential dates that look like they might work would be that, so the meeting notice will get posted tomorrow for 2 weeks. And so then the earliest that you would be able to review those would be the week of January 30th. We do have a conflict already on that Monday evening. We're doing a safety communications open house in the district. But every other night that week, there are no district events, so you could go January 31st, February 1st, or February 2nd.
Lorraine is not available on the 31st, so
Okay.
just for everyone, as you're looking at their calendars,
Maybe.
the first and the second.
Yeah.
Is there open house at MG 21 on the first?
That is on one of those days, but starts at 4. I noticed that one had that written.
4:30, 5:30?
4:30.
Yeah.
I don't have that, I have that on my calendar.
What time will we start, Dan?
Whatever works for you. So you could, look, last time around you did it at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock is your normal starting time for special meetings, so.
Okay. How does the first and second look for everybody?
First looks good, second I can make happen, but it's dicey.
That's fine with me.
Seems fine to me. So what was that about the second?
First looks good, second, yeah, I can't commit to that right now.
At all, or? is there a better time? Okay.
Mm.
Oh, someone get me a babysitter, I can commit to it in a second. I gotta find a babysitter in a second, so.
Do you want us to tentatively schedule the first or second, or you want us to go
The
for
first
next
will
week?
work, the first is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you okay if we schedule first and second?
Yeah,
even if
schedule
you're
first
not-
and second, I'll figure
Okay.
it out.
Okay,
It's just,
What time do you want to start, Dan?
Whatever works for you.
let's do 6 o'clock.
Okay.
That'll give people enough time to get here.
So we have
more.
the first and the second?
Correct.
Okay.
If we need, only as needed.
We
for
might
the
not
second.
need 2 days.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we will, because hopefully we'll get a lot.
Yeah, so as soon as we know how many applicants we have, we'll certainly share that, and I'll work with, Lorraine on scheduling, but, yeah, and then last time you were able to, after the interviews that same evening, that second night is when you did your vote right away.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Okay, so we got placeholders for the first and second.
And then set a meeting, special meeting for your.
Yeah, I mean, that can be any time, but time will get away from us if we don't get a schedule. So I think that next week, the week of February 6th, the only date that would work for me would be that Monday. The following week, actually, I've got a lot more availability.
If I may, I'm out of town those 2 weeks,
I prefer not
4th
the
through the
13th.
18th.
And don't we have MGEF on the 14th? I know that, what, starts at 4.
Yeah, so I would think this would be after that,
Okay.
but,
I just didn't want to push you on, okay.
yeah.
I have a conflict on the 13th.
Okay, so we could go even the
At
following
7,
week, the
so
week of the,
that's how early
Let's,
we do it.
let's move into the week of the 20th, because
20th?
Peter, you're gonna be out anyway, right, those 2 weeks?
Yeah.
yeah, so that's fine. So I do have a commitment on the 20th. 21st would work. We have a regular board meeting on the 22nd, so 21st or 23rd.
Preferences?
Let's see. 21st is either day is fine.
So which days?
Either the 21st or 23rd, do you have a preference?
21st.
They both work for me.
Can work for me.
Okay,
21st, okay.
all right, 21st it is.
All right, and stick with 6 o'clock? Or would you like to meet earlier?
Yeah, that's fine.
So are we only picking one?
Just one date, so that's just,
Okay,
yeah,
so it's the 21st.
21st, 6
6 o'clock.
o'clock?
6 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay, now so we'll confirm all this in writing for everyone. Okay.
Right, and then otherwise, we've got the State Education Convention, the 18th through the 20th, and then our next regular board meeting is the 25th at 7 o'clock, unless we have a closed session, then it'll be at 6.
Okay. So for next week, there's a lot going on as far as special events, so I'll work with Tish and we'll get something out to you to kind of consolidate everything, so.
Schedule this, please, Dan.
Calendars.
All right,
Thank you.
can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
It's confusing because I'm
You
usually the
made that an
second.
hour
All in
ago.
favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion carries, meeting is adjourned at 8:26 PM. Thank you, everybody.